Good morning or good evening. My name is Liliana Malden and I will be presenting a presentation on the Beltway Snipers. Real quick before we get into the presentation, I know that my TV has a few lines and cracks in them. Sorry about the inconvenience to begin with. I figured it'd probably be easier to still see the presentation on a bigger screen than on a small laptop. I will make sure to link the presentation so you can see it. And you can get my references. All right, so the first attack of the Beltway Snipers was on October 2nd in 2002. A man was shot and killed in Wheaton, Virginia in a parking lot. The next day, 4 more people were killed in Virginia and 1 was killed in Maryland. After the first 4 shootings, investigators were able to link the shootings together by using the weapon that was used, which was a .223 caliber Bushmaster rifle. Attacks continued between October 22nd and October 2nd and October 22nd in 2002. As you can see from these here, attacks were happening between Virginia and Maryland both. The attacks were random and were almost uncaused. You would be going about your daily life and maybe the person next to you might have been shot or something. They were completely unexpected by everyone. The only attack that seemed targeted was the one of a 13-year-old child on October 7th. The night before, the media had released a statement from the police saying that they were doing their best to protect the kids. The next day, the shooters specifically targeted a 13-year-old kid as he was getting on his school bus. One of the biggest things of this case was how many different agencies were working together on this case. There were so many different departments within Maryland and Virginia itself that were working together, and then the FBI also was working. The investigation task force was manned and headed by the Montgomery County Department, and they got a lot of work done. With this case specifically, there was a hotline that was available for the public to call in tips or information that they knew. There were so many calls happening that they created a specific computer program just for this case, and they developed it under a very short period of time and was able to help them a lot in the case. This program would sort through the information and the tips and tell them which ones were relevant and which ones were not very relevant. Many witnesses from the crime scenes reported seeing a white van leaving crime scenes, so that sent a lot of people looking out for white vans, which was very hard because if you look around, there are a lot of white vans that are used. Some of them are not commercially used, and some of them are, like a baker's van or a plumber's van. It's very hard to say, look out for a white van, because there are lots of them. One of the big things that was a problem in this case was the media. This case was covered 24 hours a day by the media. There were so many people outside the station. One detective said that they had to use static to keep them from being able to hear inside the building using a parabolic microphone. So the media and leaked information was a big problem with this case. Let's see, on October 17th, they got their first big breakthrough with the anonymous call from someone claiming to be the sniper. The sniper announced that he would stop shooting if the government handed him over money, and also he boasted about a crime he'd committed earlier. After the call ended, investigators looked into this crime that he boasted about and found a crime matching his description in Alabama. It was a shooting that took place outside of a liquor store. Investigators called their department and asked them about it and were able to actually get the evidence from that case. That case had 2 key pieces of evidence that helped them solve this case here. And those were a catalog that held fingerprints and a revolver that was linked to 2 earlier murders. Once they got the fingerprints, the FBI put them through their database, and it came back with fingerprints for a Lee Boyd Malvo. And when they looked him up, there was a name of interest, and that name was John Allen Muhammad. After looking into John Allen Muhammad, they found that he had a .223 caliber rifle registered to his name, as well as a blue 1990 Chevy Caprice. After finding these, they also looked into him further, and they found that there was a restraint restraining order ordered on him from his wife. So his possession of the rifle was illegal. With this, they were able to get warrants for both of them, and they were able to send out a bolo looking for the 1990 blue Chevy Caprice. They got a hit for that on October 24th, very early in the morning. They were sighted on a restway parking lot off of I-70, and the FBI and authorities were able to go in and arrest them. They arrested John Allen Muhammad and Lee Boyd Malvo, who was only 17 at the time. So there were some very important pieces of evidence found within the car. That would be the rifle, the .223 caliber rifle. There was a rifle scope as well as a rifle tripod. Within the car, there was also a digital voice recorder, a map of the area that contained getaway routes, a stolen laptop which connected them to one of the earlier crimes with the revolver, walkie-talkies, and a Chevy Caprice manual with impressions. The impressions were the impressions of a note that had been written on top of it, which was also linked to one of the crimes with the laptop and the revolver. The car itself was a big piece of evidence because of modifications that had been done to it. As you can see in this diagram here, I know it's a little bit hard to see with the lines, but it had been heavily modified. There had been a hole cut right above the license plate so that the end of a rifle could be stuck through and a bullet could go out without being blocked. And then a sheet of metal had been removed in the trunk, that had kept the cab separate from the trunk. So essentially, it made it so that someone would be able to lie inside the trunk with their feet in the cab and be able to shoot outside of the car with a rifle. As well as those modifications, the windows in the car themselves had been heavily tinted, which is illegal in DC. So Muhammad was tried in Virginia, and he was also later tried in Maryland for the crimes that were committed specifically in Maryland. When the trial first started, he opted to defend himself and very quickly switched back to having a defense team after his opening argument. The prosecuting team entered in 400 pieces of evidence and called 130 witnesses. The defense's strongest argument that they had, because Muhammad pled guilty, they tried to get his capital murder offenses lowered because they argued that he could not be held responsible for capital murder because there was no direct evidence pointing to him holding or firing the gun. This claim was supported by the fact that his fingerprints were not found on the rifle, only Malvo's were found on the rifle. And out of the 130 witnesses, none of them could testify to seeing Muhammad holding the rifle. So this was their argument, and they said that there was more direct evidence needed. However, the court disagreed with them. On November 17th, he was convicted with capital murder for the murder of Dean H. Myers, who was one of the deaths in Virginia, and capital murder under Virginia's anti-terrorism law, and homicide with the intent to terrorize, as well as conspiracy to commit murder and illegal use of firearms. Later on, he was also tried in Maryland, as I said before. Malvo had his own separate trial, where he faced several life sentences. The jury suggested for Muhammad that he be given the death penalty, and a little bit later, the court agreed, and on November 10th, in 2009, he was executed. If I had been prosecuting this case, I would charge Muhammad with multiple accounts of capital murder, first-degree murder, terrorism, and contributing to the delinquency of a minor. His intent for murder is shown in how his car was prepared. His car was modified specifically for the intent of killing. Those were modifications you could only make knowingly and purposely, which is what builds intent. I would charge him with terrorism based off of the fact that the .223 caliber rifle was his, and the car was also his, and he was driving it around. So even if he was not directly holding the weapon and using it to fire, he was assisting and almost directing the crimes themselves. These crimes were aimed specifically to create terror. The people were random, and there was a fast getaway. You can also see that they were used to commit terror because of the 13-year-old kid who was shot. because after they shot him, it was a deliberate attack. After the press had made their announcement, it was a direct response from that intended to create fear. With contributing to a delinquency of a minor, I believe that Lee Boyd Malvo would not have committed crimes like this if he had not been under the influence or in contact with Muhammad. With this, you can see that Muhammad supplied the weapons and the cars used and was able to help him commit these crimes and encouraged it in many ways. So one of the key witnesses to the trial, especially in the Maryland trial, he did not testify in the Virginia trial, he only testified in the Maryland one, is Lee Boyd Malvo himself. He testified in the Maryland trial that Muhammad had a 3-step plan to create terror and gain money from the government. The first step of his plan was the only one that got complete. That one was making a spree of killings within the DC area. His original intent was to kill 6 people every day for 30 days. While it didn't quite add up like that, there were a lot of deaths, which were greatly unfortunate. His second step of the plan, Malvo testified, was to go up to the Baltimore area and target police officers. The first step was to shoot a single police officer and then bomb the funeral for that police officer to get more officers. The third step was to drive up to Canada and along the way stop at orphanages and YMCAs to collect and help recruit younger men just like Malvo so that he could help train and recruit young teenagers that they would do his bidding. Malvo had a lot to say. He also confessed to 2 murders that happened before the Beltway Sniper attacks, and he was a key witness in convicting Muhammad in the Maryland trial. This case was a very important case. The timing happened right after the anthrax attacks and very soon after 9/11. So these 2 times there was terror and fear already in the minds of the people, and this attack was immediately causing fear even more. I don't think that the timing of this was an accident. I think they purposely went with this time so that they would be able to cause more fear and probably have a bigger impact. Possibly the biggest impact of this case on future cases is the interagency communication. This was one of the biggest cases that had so many different agencies working together to get information and evidence back and forth. So it's really important that other cases rely on this case and see how important the communication was. One of the other big factors in this case was the use of the media. As I said earlier on, the media put a lot of people in danger sometimes, like the shooting of the 13-year-old kid, and they basically informed the snipers of the progress the entire time. So the snipers were aware of what the police knew because of the media. However, that being said, they also have their uses, because if it wasn't for the media and the public, they would not have been able to find the car that had been sighted on the I-70 rest stop. So media, in this case, can be seen as a good thing and a bad thing. You have to be able to use it in the right degree. This was a criminal case at a felony level, and thank you for watching my presentation.